So tonight I'd mostly like to dialogue with you all and find out what your questions are, what you're noticing as you practice. But I have a little piece that I want to do before, just a little topic. So the sort of theme that I want to kind of dance around a little bit is being and doing. This may not be a little topic. I had this idea. I'll just do a very short thing about it. So I'll try to be brief. But I feel like there's a lot of what I hear from people is there's this struggle going on between being and doing. There's generally a sense that there's kind of too much doing happening. People don't phrase it that way. They say busy or stressed or just this kind of like obsessive or compulsive kind of activity. And that's sort of like a modern complaint. And I think there's a sort of a lot of kind of even social conversation that I hear is about just among people, not meditation people. It's just like regular people. Do you know any regular people? Yeah, regular people. Just like about how to have less going on. But you know what? Even meditation people talk like this. It's like, it's so... And it's kind of funny that people who are really into meditation talk this way unironically. You know, they like tell you how many retreats they're teaching and how busy it is. I did 3 back-to-back, you know? Shit. It's like, sometimes you have to say, like, some people really work, you know? It's like, you may think that's working. That's not working. You know? No, I know, it is. It is work in a way, right? But it's like, But the point is not about whether that's work or not. We can leave that aside. But the point is about this thing around doing. You know, it's like, And I think the way people often think about being, it's sort of like, what will happen when all the doing is removed? And that'll be like vaguely good. You know, like, when I get a chance to get away from all that, then being will happen, and that'll be like what I've been needing. And I just hear that and sense that a lot in conversation. And yet there's this other phenomena which I notice, which is people who, and even the people who are busy a fair amount of the time, who don't have something to do for like 5 minutes, let alone days, or maybe you're in between things and you don't have some function, or maybe you're retired, you know, and you don't have work to go to. Like, that's not a place of ease for people often, right? They're like, I mean, it's a place of ease for like a second. They're like, you know, but it's sort of like being is sort of thought of as the absence of doing, but it's not anything people know how to inhabit in any kind of way. That's just an observation. So this may not be universally true, just something I notice. And I think and this is part of what I wanted to talk about, there's just like some kind of misunderstanding about what being even is. or how to, if you have a misunderstanding about what it is, it's like hard to know how to approach it. And hard to then know how that should be in relationship to activity or doing stuff. So I think it's pretty clear that being can't be the opposite of doing. And if it's not clear conceptually, I invite you to explore it experientially, because that's what the meditation practice is really about. It's about exploring things experientially. Being, I'll just say, is maybe the most fundamental aspect of what you are. Like being might be the only thing that's present all the time. In the sense that whatever you're doing, you're always here. Right? Or wherever you're not doing anything, you're here too. So there's always you here. I think somebody even wrote a book with a title like that. Wherever you, how did that go? Something like, wherever you go, there you are. Yeah, like that. But anyway, that has multiple layers of meaning. Right? So I think it's clear we need to learn how to inhabit some dimension of what's here. And I like this term being because you're always being. Right? Even when you're too busy to notice it, you're here. And being, and you might not have noticed this, being has awareness as part of it, as part of its functioning. So being isn't just like, I'm being. Being, and being is a word I use synonymously with presence, right? You're always present. You're always being. It's just that sometimes you're too caught up in stuff to notice it. So that's an aspect of what's here that you could have not found any familiarity with. And another thing is that being is often something you then go look for. You say like, well, where is it? Right? And then you go looking for it. Well, okay, Will's talking about being. He says it's something that's here all the time. I'm going to go look for it. So then you look in your meditative exploration. Okay, where is it? And you don't find anything. Right? You find the body and sensations, and you find feelings, emotions, you find thoughts, you see sense experience, seeing, hearing, but you don't find being anywhere. You can't go and say, like, there it is. And yet, it's undeniable that you are. Right? If anybody ever comes up to you and say, you're not here, would you argue with them about it? You'd say, like, all right, I may not argue with you about who I really am, but I'm here. I'm looking right at you. Right? You will not argue with that. I mean, you will argue that any day with anybody. You're here. That's the only thing you might know for sure. So you can be sure that this is happening. Being, presence are here. So if you look for it, you don't find anything. And yet if you relax a little and you notice, whoa, being is actually pervading all experience. All experience, in a way, is an expression of being. Right? Just like you can't see your own eyes, but you're seeing through your eyes. You're seeing this appearing. So being, there should be a dash between being and awareness. or a slash. Actually, I don't know grammatically which is better. But it's like one thing, being awareness, one thing. So part of the problem is that we haven't actually explored being at all and learned how to relax into it. And you have to use relative terms, like relax. How do you relax into what you already are? Well, you basically just have to relax a little. Right? And say like, somebody says, do you have eyes? What would your next move be? You say like, give me a mirror. I'm gonna check. No. You say like, yeah, I'm looking at you. I don't have to see my eyes to see that seeing is happening. Okay? So this may sound esoteric, but it's basic. Okay? So being is this pervasive thing, for lack of a better term. Being just is. And being, if you start to relax into it a little bit and notice, being is full. Being doesn't have parts. Being doesn't have edges. Being doesn't have incompleteness. Being is an aspect of what's here that just is and is full. Yeah. Full is a term that only makes sense in relationship to partial, but still it's good to use that term. So it's not divided. It's kind of important. Right? So doing, and we all know this, doing when it's not connected to being, when it's not coming out of being, is compulsive. It's controlling. It is tight. It is desperate. And it never ends. It's never enough. When you're disconnected from being as a dimension of experience, boy, you're in for some doing. And you're going to be doing a long time. That's what they call samsara. The cycle, the wheel of suffering. If you want a term for it, that's a good term. Samsara, the wheel of suffering. Yeah, you welcome to samsara, baby. Welcome. You're just in for a lot of doing. And you know what? You know how complete it's going to get? It ain't. And that's what so many people are in. They're chasing completion just through compulsive action. And it's not that action is negative. Action can be wonderful. Action can save other human beings. Action can preserve our planet. Action can transform lives. Right? But when it's not connected to being, for the actor, for the one who's acting, it is not, fulfillment is not in the picture. Even people doing really important work in the world, it's coming from a different place, and often it leads to burnout. So it's so important that we have a relationship to our own nature, to being, to presence. That we learn to recognize this as a dimension of experience. Something that's invisible, so it's hard to show to people and it's hard to hold up as a shiny object and be like, hey, being, you don't see advertisements for that, right? Because it's not like that. It's not an object. And that's why people don't seek it. People will seek all kinds of experiences. They'll seek, I will be this other way in the future, right? I'll become enlightened. I'll have, I'll become so wise, meaning I'll know so many things, that other people will flock around me, and then I'll be fulfilled, right? So it's always about stuff and things. It's always about objects. And yet being isn't in that game. Being doesn't really care if you have more stuff. Actually, nothing is added to being when everybody thinks you're great. And nothing is taken away from being when people are upset with you. That doesn't mean you shouldn't care about other people. I'm just talking about the dimension of being. Yeah? So when you have some relationship to being, I'll just say some relationship, and saying to it is sort of dualistic, but when you can inhabit yourself, let's just say that, inhabit being without having to find it and hold it, but just relax into it, then you can take a step in the world. You can act, you can do things, and it has a different quality. You can even do things that have very little, show very little result in the short term and not get discouraged. That's hard for people to do things that don't show a lot of results in the short term because I'm basing my sense of well-being over the results I get. You know, like I want some gratification here from the results, something I can show to people and be like, look what I did. Or show to myself even. I don't care, I don't care what other people think, but I'm the most, internally, I know I. So it's sort of important, I think this is important, that we have some relationship to being. That's why I like to talk about it, and it's good to have a name for it, being. And then when there's a moment, then it starts to actually become a great equalizer. The difference between having a lot of activity or structures happening, like you're working on something and there are all these other people, or not, like you're sitting alone or you're outside and nothing is happening, the underlying difference in the way those feel, it starts to be less different. It starts to be less different. So being in the absence of a lot of activity stops feeling like a reduction in something, like something's missing. That's a lot of people, they're so addicted to doing because when there's not a lot happening, which is kind of a funny thing to say when you start to become aware, because you realize, like, is anything more ever happening? Not really. This is pretty full right now. You're sitting alone in the field, a lot happening, it just depends on who's deciding what's a lot happening or not. But anyway, but it stops feeling like there's something missing, which is like why people are on their phones all the time. It's like, I'm used to X degree of stimulation, If I'm not being stimulated like that, there's something missing, Yeah. Right? And so people get very addicted to that kind of vibration. Is that a woo-woo enough word? But you know what I mean. It's sort of like zzz, and when there's not zzz, it's sort of like, like for a second, it's like, ah. People like sort of, ah. Now what? That ah is so short for people. And I know this because why? I teach meditation. So I watch people go through that phase where the mind starts, they're just struggling to be present for at all. The mind's racing all over the place. And I hear, they report to me that moment where all of a sudden the mind gets a little quiet. And they've been waiting for that for days, when my mind is quiet. And then the mind's quiet and immediately they fall asleep. It's just like, or they get bored, right? It's like, oh, quiet. It's like, this is fucking boring. It's just because they don't know how to inhabit being as a dimension. Being, just being. So being is one, that's why it's important, right? Because then your doing is not like a corrective. It's not like trying to bring balance to this deficiency. And a lot of the compulsive doing that we see and participate in is this attempt to bring balance to a sense of deficiency. People don't cop to that until they really pay attention. It's like, oh, that sense that something's missing. So the right relationship between being and doing is to not make them in opposition to each other. Because you can be active and coming from a place of being, and it doesn't feel busy. It doesn't feel chaotic. It doesn't feel frantic or frenzied. It's just, sometimes it doesn't even feel fast. Athletes understand this from certain times. It doesn't feel fast even, but it is fast, but it depends on your vantage point. It's like it looks fast to other people. It doesn't feel fast on the inside. Maybe still, it's a stillness of mind. So I just wanted to talk about that, and also about being. Again, it's not this thing like you go look for. It's here, and we just. And so in a way, sometimes it's just watching the doing impulse. Being is watching the doing impulse. Being awareness can see that movement to activity. And it's really can be very interesting to just watch that arise and pass. Watch that doer. Because I will say when that doer layer falls away or is not driving, because it doesn't have to go away, but when that's not driving, it's pretty spacious in town, right? And life, I say being, life, starts to have a kind of substance to it. Right? When we have in relationship to that aspect, when there's a relationship, again, it's just like when we're in this aspect, getting what you want is not as important. Having it work out the way you think it needs to work out is not as important. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm saying it's not as important. Because usually we have nothing to weigh against that. It's either I got it or I didn't. And it's like, that's it. So that's the graph. That's the only thing happening. I got it and I didn't. So I'm this disappointed or I'm this excited. And there's nothing else happening. When we have a relationship to being, there's something else that matters more. It's not that those things don't matter. It's that there's something else. And that starts to matter more than any of those other things, because you start to notice when there's not a relationship to being in this way, none of that matters. Right? That doesn't matter because it's not connected to being. It's not part of your life, really. It's certainly not going to bring fulfillment or the things you think it will bring. I'm talking I'm not talking about basic necessities right now, even though we could talk about some things like that. I'm not talking about basic. I'm just talking about the stuff you're occupying yourself with all day. About your work, about what other people think about you, about what you think you need to be fulfilled as a human being. Right? I'm not talking about food and shelter, and not being subject to violence. Okay? It's important to make that distinction. And of course, this is important even if you're facing, it's not any less important if you're facing violence. In fact, it's just as important. So it's not, but I think it's important to say that too, so people understand that we're talking within the hierarchy of needs. That's just kind of important too, as context. But this matters nonetheless. So I just wanted to sketch that out a little bit. And for you to start to notice this as a dimension of experience. So you notice when there's any kind of sense of that or not, and how different your experience is, because that is a kind of feedback system that will help you. Now, many people come to meditative practice or to some kind of introspection because that aspect of just doing doesn't fulfill. You see very successful people. I've worked with very successful people. Success does not fulfill. I mean, you see this in the public, but if you have ever been very successful at anything or know people who have, you know there's a dimension that doesn't touch in itself. It doesn't. And it's easy for people not to know that because they think, no, but if I really, but if I really got the things I want, that'd be pretty good. You know, you don't know how much of your stuff that would touch and how much it wouldn't. And I will just posit that it'll touch a lot less than you think. A lot less. Yeah. So there's no escape from the need for some kind of inner cultivation, for some kind of right relationship or more sane relationship to what's here. Okay. And that's just my opinion. Okay. So let's, I'm up for dialoguing with you about, could be about this topic, and it could be about other things you're noticing as you explore this territory of your mind and body using the meditation methods. Yeah, Michael.
So you're talking about being and doing brings up 2 points for me. One's about ego and one's about force and history.
Mm-hmm.
So, the ego comes to mind in terms of I just got done playing 4 hours of Christmas music in San
Mm-hmm.
Francisco. And when I graduated college, it's like I had a very strict division between my original music and anything that was not that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very pejorative, very condescending. And I tell you, what I experienced today was no different from me playing at X festival.
Yeah. So you were playing Christmas music today, and what you used to have this division between things that your music and other people's music. Yeah. And in here you didn't experience any difference.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I performed enough to get at the beingness.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Really, and it's happened over decades.
Yeah.
And to the point now where, it's really no different.
That's
But I wanted to get at your earlier point about where doing arises from. When I was 10, my soul made a decision that instead of being clinically depressed like the rest of my family, I was going to be a doer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I can now see clearly in hindsight.
Yeah.
After looking at my relationship with work for the last half century.
Yeah. It was a good decision for you.
And it did save me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I began to see the cost of it.
Yeah.
See that was a decision that was made at an appropriate time.
Yeah.
And then, is it still appropriate? I guess not. It's still appropriate. And so it's been in my biome
Yeah.
for a long time.
Yeah. So let me just say right there, because even though you may go in a different direction, but so you're describing how instead of being clinically depressed and following in the depressive kind of pattern of your family, you became a doer, and that saved you in a way from that. And then you started to notice the limitations of that at a certain point. Everybody's conditioning is like that. And most people don't see the conditioning that they are working with or struggling with that's getting in their way or that's really limiting or seems like your personal obstacle. Most people don't see the adaptive part of it. That whatever that was somehow serving you, probably at an early age, in a very important psychological way. Keeping you safe, keeping you sane, And it's easy to look at now as an adult and say like, no, but if we could talk a lot more about that. But I think that's so important to recognize. And so it's just an important point to make more generally. Say like, oh, my super self-criticism, that doesn't help me at all. You say like, well, it probably did at some point. It probably got you to do a bunch of things that you might not otherwise have done, or get out of some situation, or it allowed me telling myself it's all my fault, I could do better, helped me to realize, helped me not to see how out of control the adults were, right? Because that's psychologically untenable for a child who's totally dependent on adults who are not trustworthy. So the child, this is just basic stuff, but it's important to say. So the child will come up with this thing of like, I'm the one causing their behavior, and so it's my fault. That's very adaptive. If it's my fault, I could control it. So that preserves you psychologically. And then, of course, at a certain age, you might notice, right? Oh, this is getting in my way. I think everything's my fault. I'm always, taking on as my problem what's not mine, right? So you might notice that, but that's so important to see. Anyway, I'm just saying what you said, but I want to say it more generally so that everybody can start to look at your conditioning, not as like, this is just the thing in my way, but this is something that has served me for a long time, and so you have a more sane and healthy relationship with it. Okay, anyway, continue.
And yeah, after totaling 2 cars in 1 year of sleep deprivation, it's like, I think I have an issue here.
I think I'm what?
I think I have a problem.
A problem, uh-huh. Yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
10 years ago when that happened, it's like, wow, it's really time to take this on
Mm-hmm.
seriously. And because addictive doing kills people.
Yeah.
But I've actually found recently that my being in a very significant partnership has been a very powerful reminder of what my current soul's agenda is. And I got a very strong message that here was a great opportunity to nurture myself in being with someone who had much earlier hours than me.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. And so now when I get offered gigs, it's like I don't automatically say yes.
Uh-huh.
I just go ahead.
You have something weighing it against. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of
Yeah.
like no.
That's kind of late.
And I'm sorry, I don't think that's gonna work.
Sure. Great.
And I've chosen that as a very powerful well-being incentive.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
My name is Mark. As you were talking about doing and being, I was thinking that I'm somebody that struggles with feeling alone,
Mm-hmm.
feeling loneliness,
Mm-hmm.
and I like just being alone in my apartment for me
Yeah.
just feels unnatural.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I'm meant biologically to be around people, and I think even the structure of our brain would suggest that like we're
Sure. Mm-hmm.
social beings, and that like that's something that's been hard for me all my life,
Mm.
and it's something that I work on while practicing.
Mm-hmm.
But when you describe doing, that sounds a lot like what I'm experiencing. You know what I mean?
When you're alone.
I'm doing loneliness.
Yeah. Interesting.
And
Interesting.
when I practice, I'm practicing being whole.
Wow.
You know?
Oh, beautiful. Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's very interesting. So, you don't have to, but I'm curious. How do you that's very interesting to me, that thing of you notice you're doing loneliness. Could you say anything about what how that I know it's hard to put words on this stuff, but so, yeah.
It's almost like a violence that I do to myself because I start picking things out of like people talking to each other, couples walking in the woods, and different
Uh-huh.
things.
To contrast with,
Yeah,
or
and
something.
then
Yeah.
it becomes this thing of like, why am I?
Why I'm alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean by it's something that I'm doing.
Doing, yeah,
You
yeah.
know what I mean? Because I really, I know that not all people feel this way.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a matter of my own trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Started with being sent to my room, and
Uh-huh.
later with addiction and incarceration, being locked
Yeah.
up, and different things that I have. I have a lot of trauma around that.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah,
which maybe is a path to healing that for me.
yeah.
For the most part, like it's not even that I don't enjoy being by myself. 'Cause
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah. That's
It's
so,
almost like the introverted part of me doesn't get replenished because I have all this trauma.
that's so interesting. You're explaining, you're articulating so many nuances of that experience. Yeah, well, but you're think about it a lot, but you're also aware. Like I think because you're practicing and something, you're aware in it too. And that's sort of different than just thinking about it. Because like you're not just thinking about being alone, you're noticing how you're thinking about being alone, right? And that's really different. So that's, I think, very wonderful. So you're noticing, oh, I actually like being alone until I do this thing to myself around why, what it means, what this means, or thinking of these other things and then setting up now, because you can do that with anything, right? Where now becomes less than okay because I'm comparing it to something else. So I think I just think that's wonderful. And just the way you described practice as a kind of a antidote or just being as kind of, anyway, you said it better than I could.
Yeah, I mean, it was suggested to me to like breathe into that feeling.
Yeah.
When I'm practicing.
Yeah.
And it does go away.
Yeah. It's yeah, because it comes back, yeah. But I really feel like that's important about loneliness because we can all notice that like we can be physically alone and not lonely, or you could even be not physically alone and be lonely. So it's just, that sort of like speaks to the mental aspect of it. And it's not that means like you don't need it's not like it's saying anything about the outside world exactly, but that's sort of important to notice, right? Oh, I can be alone and be in wholeness in a moment. It's complete. And I can be alone and be in deficiency. And nothing has changed externally. I think that's a wonderful topic. And I think great to just notice its mechanism. Because I think freedom comes out of really seeing the mechanism and being in relationship to being. Thank you for that. Yeah, there's some hands there.
So you're talking about the go to the road and not stopping, learning how to stop and be. And so there's the opposite, which becomes sedentary.
Wait, I was saying something about learning how to stop and be.
Right.
Yeah.
Being independent, right?
Yeah, but you don't have to stop, actually.
Well, becoming aware.
Yeah, becoming aware, yeah.
There are some people like stoners. I work from home for a while, so you have a lot of time alone.
Yeah,
And you disconnect from time. Moments you're like, okay, I get it. But the moment you stop being
yeah,
connected to it is when it sucks.
yeah.
So you have to like somehow get yourself to go. So there's this
To go,
to get up and move.
oh,
We were talking about how some people can't stop long enough to
yeah,
be introspective.
yeah,
And they do for a second and then they're done.
yeah.
The polar opposite of that, where people
I see. You stop, and then you can't do anything.
right? So there's moments
Yeah,
when it's cool to be alone. You can read whatever you want, stay in bed all day, Sundays, but then you don't see anybody and you're disconnected.
okay,
And that's the loneliness that starts from
yeah. I think,
start to do. So it's slowing down.
yeah, I think that's very interesting. No, it's great. It's great. I just want to put something into this domain. Sometimes we think about, when I say like being, we think of that, and say you're being and you're being totally still. A lot of times people think like, oh, now to get the momentum to move, you kind of like, because we think of being still as this like it's hard to describe this, but like the energy of the state decreases. This I have found is not true for a certain way of being. Like I had a teacher, one of my teachers, who his name was Shifu Shengyan. So he's this Chan teacher. And he was kind of a little bit on the older side when I was practicing at the retreats I did at his center. So he wouldn't sit in he would give talks and stuff and do interviews, do group meetings, but he wouldn't sit in the hall with us that much. But I remember one time in one retreat, it was a smaller retreat, and it was, they were holding it in the dining room, the whole retreat, because they were building the rest of the center there in New York, upstate New York. And one day I opened my eyes during meditation, and he was sitting. And it was unlike anybody sitting I had seen. Now, of course, this was just my experience of it. I don't know anything about what was happening for him. But he looked like he could pounce at any second. That's just the way it looked to me. It was like, you know? And it was just like, oh, shit. Like it changed this was in the second year, I think, of me practicing, but it changed my understanding of what sitting quietly meant. It's like, oh, you could be still, but be that alive. You know? And so it's like, it's not like there's no momentum. Like you could just go. So I just think that's important for us to have, because we don't talk about this that much, sometimes we don't have images or ways of framing stillness that aren't just like the absence of like activity. So it's like, I got to get myself going. So anyway, I want to say that so that we can understand that there are states that are very energetically quiet and it can be hard to move from. And there's a way that presence and stillness can be very alive, you know? I still remember that image of him sitting. I think about it from time to time, not infrequently. And that was almost 20 years ago. That was like 17 years ago. But really vivid, just, yeah. Yeah. He was really something. So that dichotomy between stillness and movement also is not so fixed, right? Even in like internal like Tai Chi kind of stuff, they have these like sayings that are cryptic but very meaningful, like as you progress, there's more movement in the stillness. There's less outer movement and more inner movement. What does that mean? Right? But it's sort of like speaking to that aspect of it's less visible on the outside, but there can be more energy, more movement happening. So, good topic. I think I forget who did, maybe it was Suzuki Roshi. Somebody had some image of a frog sitting, waiting for Isaac as a good man at any moment. Okay. There were a few other hands, but yeah, please.
This came up listening to the gentleman about the loneliness,
Mm-hmm.
and it made me realize that for me, it's the opposite, but it's the same struggle, which is being with or doing with others rather than alone. The stress of the compulsion to have to be on or do,
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
be in a doing state,
Yeah.
rather than just being with
Yeah. So for you, I think that's a great thing to name because everybody's pattern is a little different. So you're saying for you, being alone is more.
It's easier to be.
It's easier to be, but when you're with other people, there's this pressure to be. To be kind of like not performing or just like.
There's going to be an expectation that I'm not up for, and that
Yep.
I don't have the boundaries to actually
Yeah.
facilitate.
Yeah.
It'd be easier just to not be around people because
Yeah.
they're going to ask me for something that I will say yes to that I don't want to do.
Yeah.
It's other issues, but
Yeah.
nonetheless,
Well,
it's a
okay. So you're speaking of a couple different things. But so one of the things you just described is related to what I was saying earlier about a pattern you developed that was adaptive. You're saying, I will avoid people because I don't know that I can set a boundary. And so that's adaptive then, right? And so now that you're not in that situation anymore, you're aware and stuff, now the practice, just bringing it into your life is, I just got to set the boundaries. That's what I have to do, and I can use awareness to help me enact that. And the more simply I can do that, the less energy I have to expend. Right? And so sometimes seeing the cost and the benefit experientially is so useful. So like, so what was he saying about energy? It's the heating element. Yeah, it's all right. That's just the heaters. It'll be quiet in a moment. Where's your samadhi, guys? You're all like, so I know when you see glowing fire above your heads, that's a little disconcerting. So maybe it's good to look. So anyway, what were we talking about? We're talking about you and this pattern, yeah. So it's actually really good to see, if you let the stress of things be your guide, it helps you refine your behavior. Right? So if you really take in how stressful it is to not set boundaries and how complicated you have to make your life in order to accommodate that inability, then it lowers the threshold on you actually doing something hard. Yeah, so like, look at how simple my life can be if I just say, no. One word. Nope, or nope. That's like a softer version. Nope. Or yeah. So anyway, it's a great simplifier. And the more you can simplify like that, the easier it is to not be in a complicated doership. And a lot of the awareness is so useful in refining your conduct like that because experience is a great teacher. So lying is a great example of that. Lying, there are not many things more psychologically complicated and tiring than lying. It's really a lot of mental work. You have to remember what you said to who, you have to strategize, and it's such a mental relief and bonus to not do that. It's just easier. So you want to use that laziness as your assistant. So that's one of those great ones. It's like one of the Buddhist precepts, but it also happens to be really good for your mind. Because it's good for me because I don't remember much anyway. I'm not great at remembering, but it's one of those things that of course, as a younger person before you tell complicated, it's just so much easier not to. So experience can teach you like that. And the amount of mental bandwidth you free up from these things, being able to just note, okay, so my pattern is I don't say no and I get into these very complicated situations. And when you really feel how much work that is, it motivates you to do the hard thing. Because of course you don't say it because it's hard. It's like, I disappoint you and I feel guilty and all those things. So great.
You also harm others by agreeing to things you don't want to agree to. There is a form of harm to others.
There may be a form of harm to others by agreeing to things you don't want to agree to, but it may be of more benefit to them. They're like, yeah, it harms me, but I'll take it. You know? But I think the thing is it's harming you. You know, and it's making things, now you have to avoid people. And so it's good to see, that's why awareness is so good. Good to see how complicated it's getting. You know, or like trying to control everything. You know, it's like trying to manage everything so it goes exactly your way. When you start to see how exhausting that is, how much tension is involved in that, it becomes easier to let be, to let life flow, right? Because you feel like, oh man, it's like if I said to you, tense up your body as much as you possibly can. You tense it all up all the way, and I'd be like, all right, now just go through your day. You know? It's like you can't even maintain that for very long, you know? Keep all your muscles tense, that'd be so tiring. You're kind of doing that all the time, but people don't have we don't have as sane a relationship to the mind as we actually do with the body even. Yeah. Or intuitive, I should say. It's because we don't notice it. Yeah. Okay. Was there, Rachel, did you have something? Another time? Okay. Yeah, Leon.
I have a question about being in a situation where you can't please everybody.
Being in a situation where you can't please anybody? Everybody? When is there a situation when you can please everybody? I'm talking to a room full of people now. I know I'm not pleasing everybody. I have to live with that.
Right. And so in this particular situation, I'm practicing sort of being with everybody's point of view and anger or whatever they've got going on with what I've got going on, right? So first of all, it's exhausting to be with everybody in the same way that I know I want to be or should be, because
No, what do you mean?
well, because it's much easier to then just shut the people out that you know that you're going to be upsetting anyway and just say, I know I'm going to upset you, and I don't really want to be with all your upset because I know you're going to be upset.
Yeah.
There's really nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
And I feel like being with the upset in a way, to some degree, just becomes really painful.
Why are you thinking you should be with their upset?
Because I don't want to push their upset away. I mean, it's just a no-win situation, and they're not wrong to feel that way. I mean, they're entitled to feel the way they feel. And so I guess I feel like it's the right thing to be with their upset, just like I be with the people who are happy with the decision or whatever is going on.
Is this like it's hard when, is this like a work kind of thing or a personal thing? Or you don't have to say.
Circumstantial, whether it's work.
Yeah, I see.
I decided to take path A versus path B.
I see. And you upset a bunch of people by taking, yeah, I see. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And I feel that in that situation that, I feel like a responsibility to be with everybody's feelings.
Okay, so that might be the problem. You said you made a decision A instead of decision B. You disappoint this half of the people, you please this half of the people. But you feel an obligation to be with the disappointment of half A. I just think that's a really important thing to look at if it's an obligation. If you look at it and you say, I want to be with their disappointment, this feels really useful to me. But you don't have an obligation to be with anybody's disappointment. You don't. Tough noogies. You made a decision. They don't like it. If you want to be with their disappointment, if you have that kind of relationship, if you feel like this is going to serve a very important function, then great. But why do you have to be with their disappointment? Yeah. Yeah, it's part of the experience of life. But I think it's good to see, because sometimes we have this idea, if you meditate or that you have to then be there for everybody. And you don't. You only be there for people when it's useful. Maybe it serves a function and you decide maybe wisdom is deciding, this is important, But you have limited energy and resources, mental and physical, as a human being. And you have to decide where to spend them. And so you have to decide what is of value in terms of your action. You cannot do everything. So you could do that, Pat. You say, like, I really want to be with it. Everybody's disappointment. It's like a simple example, and this is too simple, is like a breakup. So people break up. Do you have to be with every part of the disappointment of the other person? That might not even be useful. But people often think, if I care about somebody, I need to hear everything that's hard about me breaking up with them. I can barely remember these things from my own life, but I hear about them from other people. Other people are breaking up. But I think that's just good to challenge. Do you have to be? Or, you make a decision at work. Say you are in charge of something or other, and it disappoints people. Yeah, maybe there's a degree to which you need to say something about it, but you don't have to turn it into a therapy session for everybody. That might not even be productive. So I just think that's a really good thing to challenge, especially if you're a heart-based centered person and you care a lot. That's a place where sometimes it's good to let the wisdom filter operate, And again, I was speaking to one of my teachers before, but I've been a few of my teachers who've been what I consider very compassionate. They had really razor boundaries. They wouldn't say that word, but I saw people they wouldn't just give all their energy to whoever. They just something's needed, and I'd see them open up. The teacher I was referring to was like this, just all heart. Somebody else comes with some ego-y need, boom. Nothing. I was like, wow, that's pretty complete. It's like an energetic force field. Not that's forcing anything away, just like we're putting that on extinction. That's a term I learned from my wife who did applied behavioral therapy with very young children. It's like putting it on extinction is like you don't react at all. Yeah, that makes a behavior less likely to reoccur. It just because if you give something, say, don't do that, kids are like, we'll do that again. Or if you encourage it, it's like, oh. So if you really want something not to have just extinction, no response. But anyway, I think that's a good one to challenge. Those assumptions, I should. Whenever you hear yourself saying I should, just look at it. Like, is that true? I should. I can, or I want to, or this seems wise is different. But I should, that's often coming from some kind of program, right? Okay. Yeah, we only have a couple minutes, but yeah, I'll try to be brief. Yeah.
I've been experimenting with kind of bringing awareness to energy in my body more when I practice.
Mm-hmm.
Observing energy movement and channels and energy centers. And I wondered if you find that useful or if you have anything to say about the field of energy work or how that relates to Buddhism or the meditation. Just a little.
Yeah, that's like saying, do you have anything to say about the mind? Not really. Yeah, that's like a whole domain, That's like a whole 3 sentences, yeah. Energy, good. Yeah. Yeah, I'll just say something very general because we only have that. It's like, if you say the word energy and you don't mean like pep for doing things, people think that's very woo-woo. But when you meditate, you can experience energies that are non-physical in the sense that maybe they're physical, but they're sort of like, it's a whole different domain. Yeah. And there's a whole lot of different theories about, and systems for energy stuff, and they're all different from each other. Just like there's different systems for dealing with a mind, different schools of meditation, the Buddhism, and so there's different schools around energy, even saying energy work, there's lots of different kinds of that and stuff. So the thing I will just say is like energy is a dimension of experience, whether it's mental or physical or the subtle body, as sometimes say, and working with it is a whole dimension. If you are working on the level of like, from a meditation standpoint, you can treat energy just like anything else that's arising. It's not about like using it to do something. So, but that doesn't mean you can't do some of that in addition, so. And not everybody feels that kind of energy, and it's like, and you can get just as liberated without feeling that. It's not like, I just think some people are, for some reason, experience that more and others don't, and it's not like better. So I've just noticed that from working with a lot of people. Some people, they're like, what are you talking about? And others are like, this is all that's happening. So it's just sort of, so yeah, if there was a more specific question about like how to work with a particular aspect, yeah, think about it, and let's talk about it sometime, because I like talking about that stuff, and I find it interesting, and different traditions say different things about it, and a lot of people don't have that much knowledge about it, so it's, and not that I have a ton, but I find it interesting, and it can be hard to work with certain kinds of energetic phenomena that can arise. Some that can really get people stuck around how to be with it. So that's something we could talk about too, because that sort of can be important. Okay. Everybody still being? Yeah. That's the great news about it. You don't. Just like breathing, you can't forget to do it. It's just happening. Being is like that. It's a ground of experience all the time. And in your busyness, you could not notice it, just like you cannot notice your breathing when you're moving about or people are talking to you, even though the breathing is here all the time. And being is here in an even more kind of hard to miss way. But we're just not in the habit of noticing. So we'll just sit for a moment before we close. Again, if just well, I'll close first and then I'll make the announcements. So may each one of us in our own way continue to look deeply into